I was 16 the summer my mom got sick, and by July of 2021, I'd already learned how to keep a face on. Not a great face, but a workable one. Enough that when my dad asked if I still wanted to go up to Minneapolis to see my grandma, I said sure. He needed me out of the house for a week. I could tell. I didn't push it. The Empire Builder leaves Chicago Union Station in the afternoon. Coach seat, backpack under my legs, one of those cheap ear loop masks bunched around my chin because you were still supposed to wear them then. The car wasn't full, maybe half the seats. People still kept a row between themselves and strangers when they could. I remember the seat felt sticky along the armrest, like someone had spilled soda and wiped it with a napkin and given up. That kind of detail sticks, not the big stuff. The napkin stuff. She got on at Milwaukee. I heard her before I saw her, telling the conductor she didn't need help with her bag, thanks, she'd managed heavier for longer. She came down the aisle slow, cane in her left hand, small canvas tote in her right. She stopped at the row across from mine, checked her ticket against the seat number, frowned a little, then pointed at the empty seat next to me. "You mind, hun?" I moved my backpack. Her name was Marlene. She told me that within about a minute of sitting down, the way older women sometimes do, like it's rude to sit next to a stranger without introducing yourself. She was maybe 75, short white hair, pinned back on one side with a plain barrette. Blue cardigan, even though it was 90 degrees on the platform. She smelled like ivory soap and something else, powdery, that I only later figured was probably talc. She talked. I remember being grateful for it. When you've been the quiet kid in a quiet house for 3 months, you sort of forget what small talk sounds like. And hers was easy. She asked where I was headed. Grandma's. She asked how long since I'd seen her. Christmas. She asked if my grandma was a good cook, and I said yes, and she said good. You can tell a lot about a person by how they treat butter, and I laughed, which surprised me. Somewhere around Columbus, Wisconsin, she opened the canvas tote and pulled out a Tupperware, old kind. The lid was that yellowed off white where you can tell it used to be white a long time ago. Inside were oatmeal cookies, not from a store. You could see the tops had cracked in that homemade way, uneven, some raisins showing, some tucked under. "Take 2, she said. I made too many for one person, which is the story of my life. I took 2. They were still a little soft in the middle. Sweet, but not too sweet. I told her they were good, and she said her mother's recipe. The trick was to pull them a minute before you thought they were done. She asked about school. I told her I'd just finished junior year. She asked what I was thinking about after high school, and I said I wasn't sure yet. That was a lie. I'd been sure since I was 12. But when your mom is on her 3rd round of chemo and there's a folder on your desk labeled UNIVAPPS, you don't say pre-med out loud. It felt like tempting something. I didn't say it to my dad. I didn't say it to my grandma on the phone. I hadn't even said it to my best friend, who I'd told pretty much everything else. Marlene said, "Well, whatever it is, you've got time." Then she asked if I wanted a 3rd cookie. We talked about other stuff. Her husband had been a mechanic. He'd been gone 11 years. She had 2 daughters and 1 grandson she didn't see enough of because he lived in Portland and thought calling was for old people. She said this without bitterness, like she'd already made peace with it. She asked me 1 or 2 things about my parents, and I gave 1 or 2 word answers, and she read that right away and moved on. She didn't push. Not once. At some point past the Dells, I fell asleep. I hadn't planned to. I'd slept maybe 4 hours the night before, which had been true most nights since March, and the sway of the car and the sun on the window and the sugar all hit at once. I remember watching the light go in and out behind the trees, and thinking I should text my dad to say I was fine, and then I don't remember anything after that. I woke up when the conductor came through announcing the cafe car was closing in 20 minutes. My mouth tasted like cotton. Marlene was reading a paperback with the cover folded back so I couldn't see the title. "You were out about half an hour," she said without looking up. "You needed it." I wiped my face and mumbled something, and she went back to her book. We pulled into St. Paul a little after 10, Union Depot. She was getting off there. I was going the last stop, Target Field, another few minutes up the line, where my grandma would be waiting in her Buick under the parking lot lights. Marlene stood up carefully, one hand on the seat back in front of her, and gathered her tote. She turned to me before she stepped into the aisle. "You're going to be a doctor," she said. "A good one." I smiled the way you smile when someone's grandma pays you a random compliment. "Thanks," I said. "I hope so." She nodded. Then, halfway into the aisle, she stopped, looked back. "Your mom's going to love that." The train was still moving. I could feel it slowing under my feet in that long pull the Empire Builder does coming into a station. The light in the car had gone that late summer orange, the kind that makes everything look older than it is. Marlene was watching me with the same polite, friendly face she'd worn the entire ride. I said, "How did you know about my mom?" She looked confused. Genuinely. Her eyebrows went up a little and she tilted her head, and for a second I thought she hadn't heard me over the brakes. "Honey," she said, "you told me. Back before your nap, you told me all about her." I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. I'd talked about my grandma and her cooking and school and a movie I'd seen with my dad in June, and I had answered her one or two things about my parents with one or two words, and one of those words had been fine. I remembered that clearly. I had said fine. I opened my mouth to say something and the train jolted and she steadied herself and smiled at me one more time. "Give your grandma a hug from a stranger," she said. "Tell her Marlene from Milwaukee says hi. She won't know me. That's all right." Then she was gone down the aisle, cane tapping, and I sat there with my backpack in my lap and the taste of oatmeal still in my mouth. I told myself, somewhere between St. Paul and Target Field, that I must have said something in my sleep. I don't remember dreaming, but people talk in their sleep all the time. Maybe I mumbled about my mom. Maybe I said the word pre-med. Maybe she leaned in a little because she's old and hard of hearing and she caught more than I meant to give. That was possible. It was more than possible. It was probably what happened. Except I keep coming back to the word doctor. Because I'd never said that word out loud to anyone, awake or asleep, that I know of. Not once. It was the one thing I'd kept for myself, in the back of my own head, sealed up tight, because saying it felt like promising something I couldn't deliver. My grandma picked me up in the Buick. She hugged me a long time in the parking lot, and I could smell her lotion, the same one she'd worn my whole life. And I did not tell her that a woman named Marlene from Milwaukee said hi. I don't know why. I just didn't. I ate the last cookie in the car on the way home while my grandma talked about the neighbor's dog, and I kept the Tupperware, rinsed it out at the sink, still have it somewhere. I'm 26 now. I finished residency this spring, family medicine. My mom made it. She had a rough couple of years after that summer, another surgery, a scare in 2023 that I don't want to talk about, but she made it. And she was in the third row when I walked, and she cried the whole time and pretended she wasn't. I've thought about Marlene maybe 100 times since that train ride. I've come up with reasonable explanations for all of it. I dozed off. I mumbled. She was a kind old woman who filled in the blanks and got lucky. It happens. People are perceptive. Cookies are cookies. But sometimes, on a slow night in the hospital, when I'm charting and it's quiet and the vending machine down the hall is humming that specific hum they all have, I'll catch a whiff of ivory soap on somebody's grandmother in the waiting area, and I'll stop for a second with the pen in my hand, and I'll think, Marlene from Milwaukee. And I'll think about how she said your mom's gonna love that, present tense, like she already knew mom was still gonna be around to see it. Then a nurse asks me something, and I answer, and I go back to work. I don't usually eavesdrop. Everyone catches bits in a coffee shop, that's normal, but I've always been the guy who tunes it out and gets back to whatever's on my screen. This one afternoon in Nashville, I couldn't. I still don't know if what I did was right. It was a Thursday in May 2022, maybe the 12th. I don't remember exactly. I was working out of a place off Woodland Street in East Nashville. Little cafe with mismatched wooden tables and an espresso machine that hissed like it was mad at somebody. I liked it because the Wi-Fi was decent and the barista didn't care if you nursed a cortado for 2 hours. I had a deadline for a client in Denver, some copy for a landing page, and I was about halfway through when they sat down. Two guys, late 30s, maybe early 40s. One in a light blue button-down with the sleeves rolled up, the other in a gray t-shirt and one of those flat brim caps that never quite looked broken in. The guy in the button-down had the kind of tan you get from real weekends outside. His friend looked tired. Not sleepy tired. The other kind. They took the two-top right next to me. The cafe was maybe half full, so it wasn't like they had to sit there, but people pick where they pick. I glanced up, gave them the small nod you give strangers, and went back to my screen. Then the friend said, "So you're actually going to do it?" Not a question. A flat statement, and the guy in the button-down took a long time to answer. I heard him unwrap a straw, tap the cup, exhale. "Yeah," he said. "I think I am." I wasn't trying to listen. I want that on record, at least for myself. When someone says a sentence like that 4 feet from your left ear, your brain kinda latches on before you can stop it. My hands were still on the keyboard. I just wasn't typing anymore. The friend asked, "When?" "Probably Sunday, before she gets back from her mom's." I thought, okay, this is a breakup. I've had that conversation with friends. I've been on both sides of it. That's not something to hover over. I turned my head slightly toward my screen and made myself read the sentence I'd just written. Something about a mattress company, pressure points. I read it maybe 6 times without any of it going in. Then Button-Down said, "And there's Ellie." The friend made a soft sound, not quite a word. I don't know how to describe what happened in my chest. It wasn't shock. It was more like when you're on a curb and a car goes by faster than it should. That kind of drop. Ellie, a kid's name, the way he said it, not a coworker. Not a dog. How old is she now? The friend asked. 7 in August. They were quiet for a beat. Somebody's espresso got tamped behind the counter, and the milk steamer went off, and for a few seconds I couldn't hear them. When the noise died down, Button Down was mid-sentence. Just easier if I'm already gone when she wakes up. Trish can explain it however she wants. I don't want the scene. You don't want the scene, his friend repeated. Not sarcastic, just repeating. I know how that sounds. I'm not saying anything. You're saying plenty. There was a pause where I could feel both of them looking at their drinks. I'd stopped pretending to type. I had a document open and a cursor blinking, and I just sat there with my hands hovering like I was about to play a piano. The friend said, "Have you told her?" Trish, I mean? Not yet. You're going to leave and not tell her. I'm going to leave her a letter. Jesus, man. Don't start. I'm not starting anything. I'm asking. Button Down's voice dropped, and I had to actually work to hear it, which is a weird feeling, sitting there hoping the espresso machine doesn't kick on again. He was talking about a job in Charlotte, some position that had opened up. He said it like it had already been decided months ago, like the conversation with his friend was a formality. He mentioned a woman named Kayla twice without explaining who she was, but the way he said her name the second time made it pretty clear. I thought, this isn't my business. Almost exactly like that, in my head. People end marriages, people move for jobs, kids adjust or they don't, and either way, some guy at the next table doesn't get a vote. Then he said, I already talked to a guy about the house. If she doesn't want to sell, that's on her. But I'm not going to be responsible for a mortgage in a city I don't live in. And the friend said, quiet, you know she doesn't work full time. She can figure it out. That's the sentence that stuck. She can figure it out. He didn't say it mean. That's the thing. He said it the way you'd say a spreadsheet balances. Matter of fact, I looked up just once because I couldn't help it. Button Down had both hands around his iced coffee, staring at the wet ring it had made on the table. His friend was watching him the way you watch somebody about to step off a curb without looking. Neither of them saw me. I don't think they'd have cared if they had. I put my head back down and pretended to be a person working. There's a thing that happens when you overhear something you shouldn't. Your body decides before your brain does. My heart was doing that low, steady, wrong kind of beat. Not fast, just heavy. I could feel it in my shirt. I kept thinking about Ellie. 7 in August. She'd wake up on a Sunday morning, and her dad's stuff would be gone, and her mom would be reading a letter, and then somebody, probably her mom, would have to sit down on the edge of a bed and find words. I've never had kids. I don't know what those words even sound like. I just knew that whatever they were going to live inside that girl for a long time. I tried to get back to the copy. I wrote a sentence about lumbar support and deleted it. Wrote it again, deleted it. My fingers felt clumsy, like they belonged to somebody heavier than me. They kept talking. Button Down got more animated, in a low way, listing reasons. Trish had checked out. Trish never wanted to move. Trish had said things last Christmas he couldn't unhear. His friend didn't push back much, just kept asking questions that sounded like pushback if you listened for it. Have you tried counseling? Have you told her you're unhappy? Does she know about Kayla? Every question, Button Down had an answer, and every answer sounded like a door that had already been closed a while ago. I thought about standing up, just leaning over and saying, hey, sorry, I couldn't help but hear. I've played that moment in my head probably 100 times since. In some versions, I'm calm about it. In some versions, I sound like a lunatic. In none of them does it end with him going, you know what, stranger? You're right. Because he wasn't asking for permission. He wasn't looking for a sign. He'd made up his mind before he ordered his drink. His friend was there, so he could hear himself say it out loud one more time before Sunday. That's what that conversation was. Still, Ellie. I closed the laptop. I don't remember deciding to. I just noticed my hands doing it. I grabbed a napkin from the little metal holder on my table. I have a pen I carry, a cheap black rollerball, and I wrote on the napkin. I didn't think about the words. I wrote, the person you were talking about probably deserves a real conversation. No name, no nothing, just that. I read it twice. It looked stupid. It also looked like the only thing I was going to be able to do. Getting up was the hard part. I packed my bag slow so I wouldn't look weird, and I finished the last of my cortado standing, which I never do. They were still talking. Button Down was saying something about a moving truck. His friend was nodding without agreeing. I walked past their table on the way to the door. I set the napkin down on the empty edge of it, near the sugar caddy, close enough that they'd have to notice it, but not so close it looked like a delivery. Neither of them looked up. Button Down was mid-sentence, something about not wanting to drag it out. I pushed the door open. May in Nashville. The air outside felt thick after the AC. I got maybe half a block down Woodland before I made myself not turn around. I never turned around. That's the honest part. I don't know if they read it. I don't know if it landed on the floor first. I don't know if his friends saw it and quietly slid it toward him, or if Button Down laughed and crumpled it up, or if a busboy grabbed it with the empty cups. There is no version of the ending I actually have. I went to my car and I sat in the driver's seat for a while with the keys in my lap. My hands were shaking a little, which surprised me, because I hadn't done anything really. I'd written on a napkin. That was the whole action. Still, my body was reacting like I'd done something big. I drove home. I finished the copy that night, sent it in late, apologized about the deadline. Client didn't care. I've been back to that cafe a couple of times. Never saw either of them again. I don't know if Button Down is in Charlotte now. I don't know if Ellie's mom got a letter or a conversation. I don't know if that scrap of napkin did anything or ended up in the trash with a stir stick. Some days I think I did the right thing. That leaving those words was better than nothing, better than sitting there typing about lumbar support, while a man rehearsed the morning he'd disappear on his kid. Other days I think I was a coward, that if I really believed what I wrote, I'd have said it to his face and taken whatever came back. Most days I don't decide. I just remember the way he said, "She can figure it out." Flat, balanced, like it wasn't a person he was talking about. August of 2020 was the slowest summer I ever had. Miami was half open, half closed, and half the guys I flew with were sitting at home watching their savings drain. So when a booking came in for a short hop out of Opa-locka to a small strip in the Bahamas, I didn't ask a lot of questions. I should have. That's the whole reason I'm typing this now instead of forgetting it like every other flight. I fly single engine and light twins for a broker who handles private charters out of 2 small fields north of Miami. Nothing glamorous. Rich guys who don't want to sit in commercial, families going to fish, sometimes a business owner too impatient for a scheduled flight. The broker vets the clients, or she's supposed to. The paperwork on this one came through clean. Payment cleared same day, which was unusual but not alarming. One passenger, name on the manifest was just a first initial and a common last name, the kind you'd forget by dinner. 2 bags. Destination North Eleuthera. Weather was fine. My Baron was fresh out of a 100-hour inspection. Easy money. The passenger showed up an hour early, which was the first thing that pinged me. Nobody shows up an hour early for a private flight. The whole point of paying that money is that you don't sit around. He walked into the small operations building in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly hangar rent. Charcoal, tailored, no tie, top button open like he'd already had a long morning. Late 40s, tan, gym shoulders. Watch that caught the fluorescent light and threw it back. He didn't have a driver, which was strange too. Guys in that suit usually don't park their own car. He shook my hand. Firm, dry. He asked if I was captain and I said yes and asked him to call me by my first name because we were going to be sitting 3 feet apart for 2 hours and the captain thing gets old. He smiled with his mouth, not his eyes, and said sure. I ran through the usual. Weight and balance, safety brief, where the life jackets were, restroom before takeoff because there wasn't one on the plane. He listened politely, answered in short sentences. His voice was very even. That's the word I keep coming back to when I think about him. Even. No spikes, no dips, like somebody who'd practiced being calm. He had 2 soft-sided bags. One was a leather weekender, scuffed, obviously used. The other was a black duffel, newer, heavier looking, with a small combination lock on the zipper pulls. I bent down to pick them up, and he stopped me with a hand on my forearm. Not hard, just there. "I'll carry that one," he said, and lifted the duffel himself. "Fine. People are weird about their stuff." I took the weekender out to the ramp, loaded it in the small nose baggage compartment, came back for the duffel. He was standing by the door of the ops building with the duffel between his feet. "Before we go," he said, "I want to ask you a small favor." I said, "Okay, this bag." He tapped the duffel with the side of his foot. "I don't want it on the manifest." I remember I laughed a little, not because it was funny, because I didn't know what else to do with my face. I told him I had to list every bag. That's just how it worked. Customs on the other side sees the manifest, I sign it. It's a document. "It's personal documents," he said. "Legal stuff. Divorce papers, some things about accounts. I don't want questions on landing. You know how those guys are." They pull the bag, they photocopy things. My ex-wife gets a phone call from somebody's cousin. You understand? I said I did understand, but I still had to list the bag. I offered to note it as sealed personal effects. That was a real thing I could do. It usually kept people from digging. He looked at me for a long second. Still even. Still practiced. Then he said, in the same soft voice, "I know you live off Coral Way, the little greenhouse with the mango tree in front. I'm not threatening you. I'm just saying I know that because I like to know who I'm flying with. On the off chance we have a misunderstanding." He said it like he was telling me the weather. I don't remember what I said back. I think I nodded. I think I said something about needing to grab a form for my truck. I walked out of the ops building into the parking lot and the heat came down on me like a wet towel. The tarmac shimmered. A Cessna 172 was doing pattern work in the distance. I could hear the tower on my handheld chattering to somebody about wake turbulence. Normal Tuesday noises. I sat in my truck with the door open and stared at the steering wheel. Here's the thing I want to be honest about. My first thought wasn't the police. My first thought was to just do it. Put the bag on, don't write it down, land, take the money, forget the guy's face. 2 hours of my life, nobody would know. But he'd said the mango tree. He'd said the color of the house. That meant he'd stood there on my street and looked at it. Maybe more than once. And even if I did what he wanted, there was nothing stopping him from doing it again the next time he needed a pilot, or the time after that, or from telling a friend. I'd be the guy who said yes once. That follows you. I called my broker first. She didn't pick up. I left a message that I was doing a walk around and would call her back. Then I called Marco. Marco worked customs at MIA. Not at Opelika, but he had friends everywhere and he owed me because I'd flown his kid and his kid's soccer team down to a tournament in the Keys the year before at a stupid discount. He picked up on the second ring. I told him where I was, what I was flying, and I told him what the passenger had said about the bag. Then I told him what the passenger had said about my house. Marco was quiet for maybe 3 seconds. That's a long time on a phone call. He said, "Don't take off. Don't tell him no either. Buy me 40 minutes. I asked how. "Break your plane," he said. "You're a pilot. Figure it out." I walked back into the ops building. My hands were steady. That surprised me. The passenger was sitting in one of the plastic chairs by the coffee machine with the duffel between his ankles, scrolling on his phone. He looked up. I told him I had bad news. The left mag on the Baron was dropping more than it should on the run-up, and I wasn't comfortable taking it across water without pulling a cowl and looking at it. I told him I was very sorry. I knew his time was valuable, but I was not going to fly a twin over open ocean with a rough magneto. I offered him coffee. I offered to call another operator. I told him it might be an hour, maybe 2. He didn't move for a moment. Then he smiled with his mouth again and said he appreciated my professionalism. He'd wait. He sat there. I went back out to the plane and opened the left cowl and stood next to it with a rag, pretending to look at something. My back was to the building. I could feel him watching me anyway, or I thought I could, which is maybe the same thing at that point. 40 minutes turned into 50. A white unmarked SUV pulled up to the ops building from the airport side, not the public side. 2 men got out in polos, not uniforms, and 1 woman behind them in a blazer. They went in through the ramp door. I stayed at the plane. I couldn't hear what was said inside. I only saw the passenger stand up. He stood up the way you stand up in church when the song starts, unhurried, like he'd been expecting it. He didn't look out the window at me, not once. That was the part I keep going back to. Any normal person would have looked. He just picked up the leather weekender like he was still going somewhere, and the woman in the blazer put a hand on the duffel and said something, and he set the weekender back down. They took him out through the ramp door and put him in the back of the SUV. No cuffs that I saw, just the hand on the elbow. Marco called me 2 hours later from a landline. He didn't say much. He said the duffel had cash in it, a lot of cash. He said significant, and I could hear him choosing that word. He said the guy wasn't who the manifest said he was, and that was all he was going to tell me on the phone, and I should probably not talk about any of this for a while. And by the way, did I want to grab a beer next Friday? I said yes to the beer. I didn't ask any more questions. I flew the Baron home that night to my own tie-down at a different field. I drove past my house twice before I pulled into the driveway. The mango tree was there. The porch light was on because I always leave it on. Nothing was different. I moved 4 months later anyway. New neighborhood, no tree out front, no easy landmarks. I told my girlfriend at the time it was because of the commute. That was partly true. I still fly charters. I still take walk-in clients. But when a booking comes in and the payment clears too fast, and the name on the manifest is too plain, I find a reason to be busy. My broker thinks I've gotten picky in my old age. Let her think that. The part I don't tell people at the bar, when this comes up and it sometimes does, is what he said right before Marco's people walked him out. I got most of it secondhand from the woman in the blazer, weeks later, over coffee. She said he asked, very politely, if he could keep his phone. She said no. He asked if he could make 1 call. She said no. And then he looked at her, still even, still practiced, and said, "Tell the pilot I understand." That's the sentence I'd like to forget. I haven't managed it yet. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I want to know which story you enjoyed most, so leave your answer in the comments. And don't forget to explore the other videos on the channel for more scary tales. See you soon. Bye.